This episode is the first episode of Iridium language. In it, Benjamin, not me, the other Benjamin, discusses grammatical number, and he goes into a bit about conlangs, and that's constructed languages. So I think I'm going to let him now tell you all about that.
So first thing to know about grammatical number, it's not mathematical number. Here's the difference. While they both deal with counting something, grammatical number tends to have many imprecise amounts, and it's also so generally a prefix or suffix that's mandatorily attached to a noun. If you decide to just for some reason say, because you have two computers, all as one word, that doesn't mean that English has a grammatical number that's denoted by the prefix to. And it would actually be a dual, which we'll get to a bit later. Not the fencing kind of dual, D-U-A-L, but something that you might want to recognize is that English, which is the language you speak because you're listening to me talk in English, is a singular plural system. That means that it has the two really common numbers. A lot of languages have these, and they're singular and plural. You're probably familiar with them, but here's a quick overview. Singular means one of something, such as computer, because you have one computer. But then, and plural is like computers, because there are 300 million computers. There's some number of computers that's not one, essentially. Singular is one, everything else is plural. A plural is essentially the everything else category of number. A lot of things in language have an everything else category. Complicated noun identification systems do. So this is an example of an everything else category. There's more to number than just your familiar singulars and plurals. There's also another type of singular and plural. And to explain it, I'll also have to explain two other things to you: collective nouns and base form. So collective nouns are it means just a group, but it's not a plural. It can mean you can't just plain pluralize it. You need to reroute it through a singular. Race is an example. Blood is another example. So, like a grain of rice, a drop of blood, that's the singular. Rain is another example. So, like, you could say a grain of rice, a drop of blood of rain. But then you can pluralize those: grains of rice, drops of blood, drops of rain, or whatever you want. You can think of more if you want to. You can make lists of them and bit that you'll want to consider to learn about what we're gonna shortly learn about is base form. The base form in English generally is singular. Irregular plurals, which we'll get to later, they do a bit different, but say computer, goose, door, but generally a collective forms and base forms do something weird in English, where it doesn't make any sense technically, but I would consider the base form of the collective noun race to be race because it's the shortest. So yeah, that's a bit complicated, and you could come up with a reason why it isn't, and some people might even agree with it, but we're gonna assume that in English that's what happens. But then there's something called a singulative collective system, which is a singulative and a collective instead of a singular and a plural. So collective. This happens, I guess, kind of in English with race. It's pretty rare, but then what's weird is that there's no separate, but it isn't really the same as a collective because it's like having the plural form be your base form, or a collective form, but collectives are just weird, and it's a bit simpler if you don't try to consider the difference between the plural and the collective. We might get a bit more in depth to that later. Plus, English, you can think of a lot of collectives, but still read more plurals. Say, for example, if English was a collective singulative, the plural would be the base form. So you might use computer. So there are two ways that you can try and turn English into a singulative collective. Or a collective singulative, whichever you prefer language. So one way, computers would be the collective. Another way, computer would be the collective. So if computers is the collective, then you'd add, say, ER to form computers, and that would be your singulative because the singulative is an expansion on the base form, which isn't how it normally works, but it's kind of cool but a bit complicated. But then you can also, if you're switching a language from a singular plural to a singulative collective, you can also use the form of singular as the collective and the form of plural as the singulative if you want. So the singulative of the collective computer would be computers. That's another way you can think about this whole singulative collective thing. But wait, there are yet other numbers. There's a big group that sits between the singular and the plural generally. The dual, trial, quadruple, pockle. You can invent other weird ones such as septal, which would have a noun specifically denoting 7 or something. But dual denotes 2. It means a pair of something. It's more common than a trial or a quadruple. And English has a few duals, but you can't dualize everything, so nobody really pays a whole lot of attention to the duals in English. There are things like both and all. That's a nice example of one of them, but other languages often have more of them. People think it might have been in Proto-Indo-European, though, again, it's Proto-Indo-European. We don't know a whole lot about it. But then there's also trial and quadruple. These two, the important thing to note about them is that if you want to make it naturalistic, which means like it would exist in real life, especially on Earth, Conlang, which is a language that one person or a group of people sit down and create, or maybe in the modern world they create it over a Google Doc. You can do it that way too. So for a naturalistic conlang, you'll want to make sure trials 3 and quadrules 4 are relegated to pronouns. Trials do exist, but in pronouns. Quadrules have existed in languages, but don't currently known to really exist, except probably in an Englang somewhere. That's an engineered language, which is a type of conlang. Sorry if there are too many langs. If you're getting confused, try writing all this down. It might help, but it might not. So then the pockle is different. It it means a few. There are different ways to do the particle. You can use it like a few in English, where maybe a few atoms could be a bunch, but like a few atoms in English might be 1,000, but a few houses is probably 2 or 3. You could use a particle like that. You could also use it for less than 10. That's how Arabic uses its particle. You could use the particle for pronouns only if you want. That's also totally possible, but it's generally opposing to many. Yes, some languages do have it. You could compare singular. You can compare using some in English to a particle, but English doesn't do a particle as a number. You just have to use the noun a few, or some, or a small bit. Like a few atoms, some computers, as opposed to many atoms, many computers. That's essentially the particle. It's a bit more complicated. Then there's also distributive plural, which is, it's really complicated, and most people might not be that interested in it. But then two other situations that I'd like to point out. Like numberless languages, I mean, they have a base form, but you don't really add number to them. They do exist. Other ones just have numberless. You could also just have one with a few numberless things. Like in English, if nobody said a drop of blood or drops of blood, then blood would be an example of a numberless noun, which would essentially be a collective that can't be singularized, or for that matter, singularized and then pluralized. But yeah, it does exist, but hopefully you can grasp it just by knowing that it'd be like using computer to refer to any number of computers, because I've been using the word computer as an example all along, just because I have been. I don't have an explanation. Oh yeah, I do, because I am recording this on a computer, so that's why. But yeah, then if you don't want to really do a whole other then there's distributive plural. I might have mentioned it already in the podcast, but it's weird and complicated. It's possible to have a form denoting all, but yeah, it would be like, it's somewhat similar to a collective, but I'm not sure whether you'd be justified in just going out and calling it a collective. Other examples of collectives are, say, flock. Flock is a real collective noun because there's no real way to get it into a singular, but I also like but it's simpler if you use collective to include things like waste and blood, and water and rain and all sorts of other things. There are things, but other people might use the term mass nouns or count nouns, so yeah, there is some variants of terms. All generally pick a term and run with it in any given episode. But that's essentially a very simple version of grammatical numbers. You might want to read a Wikipedia article if this really intrigues you. It is an important thing to take into account when commenting, and can be a bit confusing when translating and learning languages. So That's grammatical number.